you're starving your performance. Many athletes undereat without realizing it, and here's why and what it's costing you. In this video, I'm going to show you some of the reasons, the science behind why it's destroying what you're working for, and of course, talking about some suggestions of where we can improve. Hi, everyone. My name is Paris, too. They call me P2. I'm a nutrition and fitness coach, and I work primarily with weight class athletes for performance nutrition. Now, I've been doing this work for over a decade, and believe me, I have noticed a pattern amongst various clients where there's a lot of the dedicated athletes and humans unknowingly not eating enough and creating just low energy availability. And what I've noticed is that they usually engage in the flip side where there is a lot of overeating. And then you're in this yo-yo cycle of undereating and overeating. And that's why I wanted to make this video. Now, just a quick note, I am not a mental health professional or a dietitian. So for serious eating issues or any health concerns, please seek professional support. Now, here is the issue as I see it. I feel like somewhere along the way, athlete culture sort of infused with diet culture, where diet culture has this obsession with eating less and that lean is better. Now, I'm not saying that being in an intentional caloric deficit is not part of athlete culture. I'm just sort of making, a bit more of a general statement so we're on the same page with where I'm coming from. And perhaps you've subscribed to that language and that you are thinking that maybe, hey, I eat less, I'm stronger. If I'm eating too much, I'm lacking discipline, or I'm soft, or I'm fat. The facts are that if you're an athlete, to make that car machine example, which is not very accurate, but you're anticipating that you're going to, perform like an elite machine when you're not treating yourself like one, perhaps comparing yourself to someone that is sedentary sitting at a desk, which is not wrong, just different. And so we got to approach it differently. Cool? Okay. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes going through some of the reasons. Then we're going to talk about how that destroys performance, and we're going to come together with some solutions. Why athletes undereat. Reason number one. Maybe you don't know what enough food actually looks like. Maybe you think that 1,800 calories is a lot, and that's enough. That's plenty, right? I mean, the labels say 2,000. But perhaps your needs are closer to like 3,000. And this is where I'm going to review basic metabolic rate for a moment. So our BMR is the base amount of energy we require to function at rest, to just be human. We haven't done anything yet. And that, of course, will change on a few different variables and factors. But on average, for our purposes, it's going to be around minimum 1,300 to 1,700 calories. That means for us to exist as humans, we need around that much calories. So if you think 1,800 is enough to then fuel your multiple training sessions, your study sessions, your work, your obligations, all of the above, that's not correct. You're in an aggressive deficit probably, which is not wrong if you're intending to do that. But for the purposes of this particular video, you're probably undereating because you don't know what enough food actually looks like. We have our basic metabolic rate. After that, we have our non-activity thermogenesis, which is things that aren't intentional training, but what I'm doing right now. Notice I speak with my hands a lot, my tone, my energy. Then you have your thermic effect of food, which is essentially how your body digests the fuel that it's consuming. And then we have our activity. So all of that is our total daily expenditure, which is going to be primarily higher than someone that is not an athlete. Following along that reason number two is you think you're having more than you actually are. Now, if you don't know to the previous point what eating enough is, and maybe you haven't been tracking and you're assuming or you're making guesses on what you're seeing on your plate, maybe your eyeball portions are off. So maybe you think you're having 6 ounces of chicken, but it's actually 4 ounces. Maybe you think that you are eating around 2,500 calories, but you're actually eating 2,000. Or what's really honestly something I've seen a lot is that sometimes you just skip meals by accident when you don't mean to because you're busy, you're running around, and it just catches up with you later. And of course, this is true the other way around, where those little things that not tracking the 2 ounces here, the 500 calories there is what creeps in and we end up in surplus unintentionally. But this is also true the other way around, especially if you're not familiar with what your macros are, your calories are, what food will look like. If you don't have experience really journaling or tracking or having worked with a professional, a lot of this is kind of guesstimation up in the air. Reason number 3 that perhaps you're under eating. You're measuring the wrong things. And of course, I mentioned I work with weight class athletes, so weight's an important metric in this particular conversation. But overall, weight itself is still just one metric. If you're only tracking weight and your body composition, like you can say, hey, this is how much I weigh on the scale, and that's what my fat percentage is. You're not tracking the other variables that really respond to your immediate uptake of fuel. So, for example, your power output, your recovery time, your focus, your mood, your performance is a lot more sensitive to your eating than your weight is. It takes a little bit more time. Like your weight can fluctuate from morning to night. Just we all have different variations there, but if you ate something with a little bit more sodium, maybe the next day your weight fluctuated. But if you were missing a whole meal, you would have more of an immediate response in your performance. Segue to reason number 4. You might be confusing your hunger cues with discipline. Now, if you're an athlete at this point, you've gotten to wherever you've gotten, probably from a lot of discipline. And so perhaps it could be that you've kind of trained yourself to ignore some of your hunger cues in the name of discipline or mental toughness. But when you're consistently under eating, some of those can be thrown out of whack. So your leptin and ghrelin, which are your satiation and your hunger hormones, those can, like, you're not entirely sure when you're hungry or full because like your cues are off. And when people say like, listen to your body, it's like, it's a little bit unreliable. And I don't mean it in the sense that don't listen to your body, but what does that mean? That's a very ambiguous, random statement to throw at someone that isn't necessarily aligned fully with their cues, where you might be mistaking it as discipline. So you're like, well, in the mornings, I'm not hungry. Okay. But if you're about to go do a 2-hour training session, your performance will be impacted. There is no need for you to actually do a fasted session. It depends on what you're doing, but what I'm saying is that some of those situations could have been learned behaviors that we've normalized versus something that is actually true. Like maybe you would actually benefit if you took some time to develop being able to eat in the morning before a training session. All of that to summarize is that your signals may not be completely reliable. Reason number 5. Maybe the culture around you normalizes under eating. Maybe you're seeing other people not eating enough either, so it's normal. And that doesn't mean that it's correct or appropriate. Maybe if other people are restricting and they've also adopted some of those, high culture, other values that are not necessarily helpful for sustainable nutrition for athletes, it's become normal. So you think that it's normal because everyone's doing it. And perhaps you end up comparing yourself to other people that are also not eating enough, that also haven't worked with professionals, that also haven't dove in to explore their own relationship with foods, to understand their own cues, to understand their intake. There is a lot more to the conversation than just eat healthy, because that is very, very vague. And there's a lot of layers to unpack, especially when it comes to sustainable nutrition and athlete culture. And especially depending on the sport, where the support around you could very well be perpetuating some of this disordered eating or poor relationship with food. Like anything that is very weight oriented or body composition oriented. People, we might have insecurities, and like some coaches or teammates, guardians may perpetuate that. All right, let's recap the reasons. Reason number 1, you don't know what enough food actually looks like. Reason number 2, you think you're eating more than you actually are. Reason number 3, maybe you're not measuring the right things. Reason number 4, you're confusing your signals with discipline. And reason number 5, maybe the culture around you is normalizing undereating. How does all of this impact performance? Okay, you may have heard the terminology survival mode. Not necessarily an accurate term. For our purposes, what we need to know is that there is something called metabolic adaptation, and your body adapts to the lower energy intake. So when we were talking about your basal metabolic rate, that's going to decrease to sort of match where you're at. It adapts. As a result of that, the non-essential functions are deprioritized. Your body just starts to use the fuel that it has, and it goes like, all right, this is not a priority. Throw it out the window. And it might be very, very important, but it only has so much fuel and so much capacity to give. So it just makes those choices for you. It might be that your thyroid hormones are reduced and growth isn't a priority when energy is limited. You could definitely start to break down your muscle tissue. You're breaking down more than you're building. You could see some of your reproductive hormones crash. There could be a decline in testosterone. There could be a decline in estrogen. This is unfortunately one of the examples where female athletes can start to see irregular periods or losing their period completely. And then there's an added stress to the body because this is a stressor, which could also continue to increase our cortisol, our stress hormone. And that makes everything a lot harder because if we're more chronically stressed, we're not recovering well, we can't perform as much, perhaps it's impacting sleep. And now we've created a whole other cycle. If you missed a meal that day, you might notice, hey, training is a bit more challenging that evening. But if you continue to do this over days, weeks, months, a whole season, you're not really even moving ahead either. The thing is, we're trying to move forward. You're trying to be more competitive. You're wanting to increase strength, increase agility, increase stamina. And sometimes the work is done in the off season. Perhaps there are stages to being in intentional caloric deficit, being in a maintenance, being in a surplus. The problem really here is that if you end up either unintentionally just not eating enough, or you've just normalized being in a caloric deficit because at some point the deficit stops doing what you think it's doing and your body will plateau and so will your performance. So what do we do about it? Okay. Let's stop that restrict and perform cycle and eat a bit more strategically with our training. And maybe that means very intentional caloric maintenance or caloric surplus that match our training, that match our season, that are appropriate with where we are. Okay, next, calculate what you actually need. So what is your BMR? We're eating significantly more than that. And so we're looking at 30 calories per kilogram. Look at all of the variables. So you're not just tracking weight or body composition, but also all of the other performance markers and qualitative markers from how you are feeling as a person, how your training sessions are evolving, as well as other numerical factors like how much weight you're lifting, your recovery rate, or all of these other things. And for your macros to have a bit more specific target, you're looking at not being at the RDA of the recommended daily allowance because we're not just trying to do the bare minimum. If you're an athlete, you're trying to do more than the bare minimum to support what you're demanding of your body. So you're looking at 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram. You're looking at about 5 to 7 grams of carbs per kilogram and about 0.8 to 1.3 grams of fat per kilogram. And this is just an average overall. Of course, it depends again, like I said, what phase you're in and what you're doing. If you're in a deficit, maintenance, or surplus, and the overall calories we're working with. But essentially, if you are only eating 1,700 calories, you are significantly under eating. Now, if you're recognizing yourself in this pattern, that's exactly what I do. If you'd like to work with me one-on-one, check out the link in the description box, as well as the next cohort of the Level Up method, which is exactly this, to have education and conversation around nutrition and mindset for athletes. Bottom line, you cannot outtrain poor fueling. Side rant. This is not going to be the same thing of you can't outtrain a bad diet. I was just being cheeky because again, bad, what is that? What I mean here is if you're not eating enough, do not expect your body to be able to handle what you're asking of it. Something's got to give. You cannot expect elite performance. And if you recognize this pattern in yourself and you're like, oops, you can stay stuck or do the work you need to do to maybe make peace with eating a bit more and start fueling to see what your body can actually do, which is incredible. Let's fuel it. Let's see how strong we can get, how much we can lift and how much we can run, and just incredible to see what our bodies are capable of when we evolve our relationship with it and stop looking at diet culture as like the be all end all. And one thing that also happens is that when you start to eat enough and you're actually feeling really good, like that has a wonderful spillover and everything else. Like your confidence goes up in every area, which is fantastic. Let's celebrate what we can do. And if you're an elite athlete, you got to feed the machine. This is directed at the weight class athletes. You have to be able to fuel for performance in between competitions and in between fights. And there's still a way to do it so that you're not yo-yoing or ballooning. It's just recognizing how to actually put your performance first rather than reacting and putting nutrition as an afterthought. So, which of these reasons perhaps resonated with you the most? I would love to hear from you. Comment below and let me know. Thank you so much, everyone. Catch you next time.